Welcome back to episode number 5 of our Come Reflect Act series. After we've dived deeper into the essential cybersecurity requirements in the last episode, today we would like to zoom out a bit and take a look at the bigger picture on how the Cyber Resilience Act will affect the broader IoT market within the European Union. And for those of you who have just tuned in into this video, maybe a short breakdown of what the Cyber Resilience Act is and its most important dates when the regulation comes into force. So basically the Cyber Resilience Act is a new EU directive that sets the baseline of cybersecurity requirements that a product with digital elements needs to fulfill when it's sold in the European Union. And these requirements apply from December 2027 onwards for each product with digital elements that is sold in the EU market. However, before that, there's also one very important deadline that you as an IoT manufacturer should have in mind, which is September 11th, 2026, which is when the vulnerability reporting requirements are in force of the Cyber Resilience Act. So those two dates, please bear those in mind when talking about the Cyber Resilience Act in the following video. Now let's focus on the effects of the Cyber Resilience Act onto the broader IoT market in the European Union. So first of all, let's start with the direct effects, and then let's also take a look at the indirect effects that the regulation has on the IoT market. First of all, the direct effects, you might have already come across those. We talk about financial penalties, we talk about the denial of SAE certification, and we talk about losing the market access. When talking about financial penalties, there are 3 different levels of financial penalties that the CRA imposes. First, the highest level is a monetary fine of up to 15 million euros or 2.5 up to 2.5% of the global turnover of a company, depending on whichever is higher. And those fines are imposed when you don't meet the obligations of the CRA, such as the essential cybersecurity requirements or vulnerability handling requirements, then those fines are imposed. Second level is a little bit less, but still quite hefty fines. We talk here about 10 million euros of financial penalties or 2% of the global turnover of a company. And those fines are imposed when you miss to comply with other requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act that are not as critical, so to say. And the last level is up to 5 million euros or 1% of the global turnover of a company. And this one is interesting because this one is imposed when you, for example, provide a certification authority or an official EU body with wrong information regarding compliance with the CRA. So essentially when you trick your way into compliance, even if you don't comply with the regulation. Furthermore, the declaration of conformity, which is a document that each product with digital element needs to have when it's CRA compliant and sold in the European Union market. This will be the basis for putting a CE marking on your product. So if you don't sign this declaration and you miss being compliant with the CRA, then you're not allowed to have a CE marking on your product, which essentially means that you lose market access to the European Union market as a whole. So on the one side, you have the financial penalties. On the other side, you have the penalties of losing market access, which also translates into losing revenue from the European Union. Now let's focus on the indirect effects that the Cyber Resilience Act has on the IoT market. First of all, you have compliance as a competitive gatekeeper. You also have indirect effects on your cyber insurance policy, on your investments, and also on your reputation. But let's go through them in order. Cybersecurity as a competitive gatekeeper basically means that your customers will include CRA compliance as a requirement in their tenders, in their RFPs, or when purchasing your products. So therefore, if you don't meet the CRA, you're out of getting or gaining this business, and therefore you risk, basically similar to the denial of the CE certification, you risk losing revenue streams, but not by a direct market access loss, but just by your customers not choosing your products anymore. Furthermore, if we think about cyber insurance policies, if you don't have compliance well documented and then an incident happens that affects your products or a customer of yours using your products, well, the insurance companies will likely be very hesitant to basically pay for that incident and cover the damages or fees that the incident has caused. Furthermore, when thinking about, especially when you are a company that's planning to grow and get some capital from investors or VCs, then the due diligence list that those investors and VCs have for basically providing you with the necessary capital will increase by: have they achieved Cyber Resilience Act compliance? Have they, for example, achieved Data Act compliance? All those upcoming regulations will be checked and could potentially hinder your company or your product to grow in the European Union market. And furthermore, nobody wants to be in the newspaper with their brand, their product, and a headline of having a cyber incident and then maybe also not being compliant with a regulation that you claim to be compliant. So the brand damage and the reputational damage needs to be also considered when thinking about the indirect effects of the Cyber Resilience Act on the IoT market. In my conversations with IoT manufacturers, the Cyber Resilience Act is often viewed as a necessary evil that they have to fulfill. However, the regulation also poses a big opportunity for you as a manufacturer. On the one hand, being early in complying with the regulation can lead to you getting more business that competitive products that miss to achieve compliance are not getting. On the other hand, there has been a very interesting study done by McKinsey saying that cybersecurity in IoT solutions is way more important to IoT buyers than IoT sellers think. So essentially, addressing this gap of meeting the IoT security needs of your target buying group can lead to you making more revenue and getting more business for your IoT solutions, and also increasing the willingness from IoT buyers to spend more money on your solutions. Just to recap, the CRA is approaching in a very fast pace. So already less than a year from now on, the first vulnerability reporting obligations are in force, and then a year later, in December 2027, the full CRA is in force. And therefore, it's critical to get your roadmap to compliance set up internally as early as possible and as clear as possible, so that you now already think about how you can achieve compliance, even if a lot of harmonized standards are still missing and there are some bits and pieces around the regulation that are not yet fully clear. It's crucial to deal with it now, make a plan, and then be ready when December 2027 is around the corner and the CRA is in force.